I never thought my ceramic roosters would become the symbol of everything my son was ashamed of. There I was, dusting my collection of 43 colorful birds that morning, each one a small treasure I'd found at garage sales and thrift stores over the years. My favorite, a cheerful red and yellow rooster named Clarence, had been my first purchase after Harold died 7 years ago. These little creatures brought me joy in my quiet house on Maple Street in Boise, where I'd lived for 32 years. That afternoon, I discovered a video online where my own son called me his estranged, eccentric mother who lives off casseroles and clutter. But what if I told you that insult would make me more famous than he ever dreamed of being? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Dolores Cartwright, but everyone calls me Dolly. At 67, I suppose I fit the picture of what most people would call an ordinary woman. I live in a 2-bedroom ranch house with faded blue shutters and a garden that's seen better days. The mortgage was paid off 15 years ago, thanks to Harold's life insurance and my steady job at Jefferson Elementary, where I served lunch, 2 hungry children for 28 years until I retired. The house still smells like the cinnamon rolls I baked yesterday, using my worn Betty Crocker cookbook from 1978. The pages are stained with decades of cooking adventures, some successful, others less so. Harold used to joke that my disasters tasted better than most people's masterpieces. The spine is cracked at the page for tuna casserole, my go-to comfort meal that got us through his cancer treatments and the lonely years that followed. My kitchen is the heart of this house, with its avocado green appliances that Harold and I bought when we first moved in. The refrigerator hums a familiar tune, and its surface is covered with photos held up by souvenir magnets from places I've never been but always dreamed of visiting. Most of the pictures are of Ethan at various stages of his life, though the most recent ones are at least 5 years old. Ethan is my only child, my pride and joy, though I haven't spoken to him in 8 months. He's 35 now, living in San Francisco with his wife Janine, running some kind of tech company that I don't pretend to understand. He used to call every Sunday after Harold died, but those calls became shorter and less frequent until they stopped altogether. The last time we spoke, he seemed irritated when I mentioned my YouTube channel. "Mom, you really should be more careful about what you put online," he'd said, his voice tight with something I couldn't identify then but recognize now as embarrassment. My YouTube channel, Dolly's Kitchen Chronicles, has exactly 47 subscribers, most of whom are ladies from my church or neighbors who subscribed out of politeness. I started it 2 years ago when Nancy Lopez, my best friend since high school, convinced me that sharing my recipes might help other people feel less alone. Nancy is a force of nature at 71. With silver hair she wears in a perfect bob and enough energy to power a small city. "Dolly, you're sitting on a gold mine of wisdom," she'd insisted, perched on my kitchen counter while I rolled out pie dough. All those stories about feeding families on tight budgets, making something from nothing. People need to hear that, so I bought a cheap camera from Walmart and started recording myself cooking the same meals I'd been making for decades. I talk while I chop onions, sharing memories of Harold or stories from the school cafeteria. My videos get maybe 15 views each, and I'm always surprised when someone leaves a kind comment. The routine of my days is predictable and comforting. I wake at 6, make coffee in the same blue mug Harold gave me for our 10th anniversary, and check my small vegetable garden. Tomatoes and green beans mostly, though I try something new each year. This summer it's butternut squash, which is taking over more space than I anticipated. Tuesdays and Thursdays I volunteer at the church food pantry, helping families stretch their grocery budgets. It reminds me of my cafeteria days, finding ways to make nutritious meals that kids would actually eat. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing that the casserole recipe I perfected in 1987 is still feeding hungry people today. My social life revolves around Nancy, who stops by most, afternoons for coffee and gossip. She never married, dedicating her life to teaching high school drama for 43 years. Her retirement has been anything but quiet. She's currently directing the community theater's production of Our Town, and somehow convinced me to help with costume alterations. Then there's Reggie Barlow, my 72-year-old neighbor who lost his wife, Martha, 5 years ago. He's taken to bringing me vegetables from his garden and lingering on my front porch longer than necessary. There's something sweet about the way he asks if I need help with anything, though I suspect he's the one who needs company. His lonely house echoes with too much silence, just like mine did in those first months after Harold's funeral. The ceramic roosters started as a joke. Harold found the first one at a flea market and said it reminded him of me. Something about my morning hair sticking up in all directions. After he died, I found myself drawn to them. These proud little creatures with their bright colors and defiant poses. Each one has a story. The blue one came from a yard sale where the seller was moving into assisted living. The green one was Nancy's birthday gift to me last year. People might call it clutter, but I call it company. When the house feels too quiet, I look at my roosters and remember that even small things can be beautiful and worthy of love. I never expected my peaceful life to be disrupted by a phone call that would change everything. But that's exactly what happened on a Tuesday morning in early September, when Nancy called me in a state of excitement I hadn't heard since her drama class won the state competition. "Dolly, you need to get on your computer right now," she said, her voice breathless. "I was looking up Ethan's company for that article I'm writing for the church newsletter, and I found something you need to see." My laptop, a gift from Ethan, 3 Christmases ago, sits on the kitchen table where I film my cooking videos. I'm still learning how to use it properly, but I managed to navigate to the website Nancy directed me to. It was a recording from some tech conference, and there was my son, looking polished and successful in a way that made my heart swell with pride, until I heard what he was saying. The moderator had asked about his background, his inspiration for starting his company. Ethan smiled that charming smile he'd perfected in high school debate club and launched into a story about overcoming his humble beginnings, about reinventing himself despite growing up with limited resources. "My father died when I was young," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "My mother, well, she's a bit estranged now, very eccentric, lives off casseroles and clutter, if you know what I mean. I had to learn early that if you want to make something of yourself, sometimes you have to leave the past behind." The audience chuckled at his casual dismissal of me, of the life we'd built together, of the sacrifices I'd made to ensure he could pursue his dreams, casseroles and clutter. 28 years of getting up at 5 in the morning to feed other people's children, working double shifts when he needed new clothes or wanted to go on school trips. All of it reduced to a punchline. Sat in my kitchen surrounded by my roosters and my memories, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not just hurt, though that was there too, but something fiercer, something that had been sleeping for too long. "Oh, honey," Nancy said when I called her back, my voice shaking. "I'm so sorry. I thought you should know, but maybe I shouldn't have—" "No," I interrupted, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "I needed to know." That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through my house looking at the life I'd built with Harold. the home where I'd raised our son. Every corner held memories. The pencil marks on the doorframe where we'd measured Ethan's height. The dent in the wall from when he'd thrown a baseball inside despite being told not to. The family photos chronicling birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday evenings. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up sewing patches on his jeans because buying new ones wasn't in the budget. The times I'd packed extra sandwiches in his lunch because I knew his friend Marcus never had enough to eat. The way I'd worked, overtime every December to make sure Christmas morning felt magical, even on a cafeteria worker's salary. Had all of that really been so embarrassing? Was the love I'd poured into our simple life really something to be ashamed of? By morning, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I found Ethan's business card in the junk drawer while looking for a pen that actually worked. Ethan, Cartwright, CEO and founder, Digital Renaissance Solutions. It read in sleek silver letters on heavy cardstock. Even his last name looked different in that fancy font, like he'd managed to redesign his entire identity. I set the card on my kitchen table next to my laptop and stared at it for a long time. This polished professional who could dismiss his mother as eccentric and estranged to a room full of strangers. When had he become this person? When had I become someone he was ashamed to claim? The hurt was still raw, but underneath it burned something I hadn't felt in years. Righteous anger. Not the quick flash of irritation when the grocery store changes their layout again, but a deep, steady flame that made my hands shake as I positioned my camera for what would become the most important video of my life. I didn't plan what I was going to say. I just pressed record and let the words pour out. "Hello, Internet," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "My name is Dolores Cartwright, but you can call me Dolly. I'm 67 years old, I live in Boise, Idaho, and apparently, I'm an embarrassment to my son." I held up his business card to the camera. "This is my boy, Ethan. He's very successful now, runs a big company in San Francisco. Yesterday, I found out he's been telling people that his mother is estranged and eccentric and lives off casseroles and clutter." My voice caught slightly on those words, but I pushed through. "Now, I want to tell you about casseroles and clutter, because maybe Ethan has forgotten what they really mean." I got up and walked to my refrigerator, the camera following my movement. "This is last night's tuna casserole. I made it because it was Ethan's favorite when he was little, especially when he was sick, when he had pneumonia at age 8 and couldn't keep anything down. I made this casserole every day for 2 weeks, trying different variations until I found one he could eat. That's not just a casserole. That's love in a 9x13 pan. Moved to my ceramic rooster collection, picking up Clarence with gentle hands. And this clutter. Every single piece has a story. This rooster came from Mrs. Henderson's yard sale when she moved to the nursing home. She told me it reminded her of the rooster her grandmother had kept, how it would wake the whole farm every morning. When I bought it for 50 cents, she cried, because she was happy it was going to someone who would love it. The camera captured everything. My shaking hands, the tears I didn't realize were falling, the way the afternoon light made my kitchen look both shabby and somehow sacred. I worked in a school cafeteria for 28 years. I continued, sitting back down. Do you know what that means? It means I fed other people's children like they were my own. It means I learned every kid's food allergies and preferences. It means I saved leftover fruit cups for the ones who came to school hungry and pretended I'd ordered too much so they wouldn't feel ashamed taking seconds. I picked up my worn cookbook, pages falling open to recipes stained with decades of use. After my husband Harold died of cancer, I had to raise Ethan alone. We didn't have much money, but we had love. We had Sunday pancakes and bedtime stories, and Halloween costumes I sewed by hand because store-bought ones were too expensive. My voice grew stronger as I talked, the anger giving me courage I didn't know I possessed. I put myself through every sacrifice a mother makes because I believed in my son. I worked double shifts to pay for his college applications. I sold Harold's tools to help with his security deposit when he moved to California. I celebrated every achievement and comforted every disappointment, and I never asked for anything in return except maybe a phone call now and then. I looked directly into the camera lens, imagining Ethan's face on the other side. But here's what really breaks my heart, Ethan. It's not that you're successful. I'm proud of you for that. It's not even that you don't call much. I understand. You're busy. It's that you've decided the love that raised you is something to be ashamed of. It's that you think becoming someone important means erasing where you came from. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking my backyard, where Harold's tomato plants still grew wild every summer. You want to know about my eccentric life? I grow vegetables and share them with neighbors. I volunteer at the food pantry because I remember what it's like to count every dollar. I make videos about cooking because I believe feeding people is one of the most important things we can do. I collect ceramic roosters because they make me smile on lonely days. Turning back to the camera, I felt something shift inside me, like a door I'd kept locked finally swinging open. And you know what? I'm not ashamed of any of it. I'm not ashamed of living simply or finding joy in small things. I'm not ashamed of choosing love over money or community over status. I'm not ashamed of being your mother, even if you're ashamed of me. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted but also strangely relieved. So here's what's going to happen. Internet, friends. I'm going to keep making my videos, keep sharing my recipes, keep living my eccentric life. And if my son wants to keep pretending he sprung fully formed from some corporate boardroom, instead of a little kitchen in Boise where his mother loved him enough to make the same casserole 14 times until he could keep it down, well, that's his choice. I reached over and turned off the camera, my hands surprisingly steady. Nancy arrived 20 minutes later, letting herself in through the back door, as she'd been doing for 40 years. I felt a disturbance in the force, she announced, then stopped when she saw my face. Oh, honey, what's wrong? I told her about the video, about everything I'd said. Nancy listened without interruption, her expression cycling through outrage, sorrow, and finally, fierce pride. Good for you, she said when I finished. It's about time someone called that boy out. I don't know if I should post it, I admitted. What if he sees it? What if it makes things worse? Nancy took my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman her age. Dolly, you've spent 35 years putting his feelings before your own. Maybe it's time to put yours first. She helped me upload the video to my YouTube channel, adding a title that made me blush. My son called me embarrassing. Here's my response. We both expected it to join my other videos in relative obscurity, maybe getting a few sympathetic comments from my usual viewers. Neither of us anticipated what happened next. I went to bed that night feeling simultaneously drained and oddly energized. For the first time in months, I didn't lie awake thinking about Ethan's silence or wondering what I'd done wrong. Instead, I thought about my husband, about the pride in his eyes when he'd watch me handle a crisis at the school, or comfort a troubled child. Harold had never been ashamed of who I was. I woke up to my phone buzzing with notifications I didn't understand. Facebook, YouTube, email alerts, all of them showing numbers that didn't make sense. My YouTube channel, which had 47 subscribers when I went to sleep, now showed over 3,000. With shaking hands, I checked my video. The view count read 47,000 and climbing. The comments section was flooded with messages from strangers. This made me cry. You sound like the mother everyone deserves. Your son doesn't know how lucky he is. I want to hug you and try your tuna casserole recipe. Thank you for reminding us that simple love is the most beautiful thing in the world. I called Nancy, my voice barely a whisper. I think I broke the internet. She arrived in record time, and together we watched the numbers climb. 100,000 views, 200,000, 500,000. My phone started ringing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Local news stations, online magazines, people wanting to interview the lunch lady mom who'd gone viral. But the call that mattered most came at noon. Ethan's name appeared on my phone screen for the first time in 8 months. Mom? His voice sounded strange, smaller than the confident man I'd heard in that conference video. Hello, Ethan. I saw your video. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. Can we talk? The screenshot Nancy printed and framed shows the exact moment my life changed. My kitchen table with the laptop open, the view counter reading 10847, 3-92, and my face reflected in the screen, looking completely bewildered. She hung it on my refrigerator next to a photo of Ethan's high school graduation, and somehow, those two images, side by side, told the whole story. That first conversation with Ethan after the video went viral lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I know because I stared at my phone timer the entire time, afraid that if I looked away, the call would disappear like a dream. Mom, you need to take that video down, he said after we got through the awkward hellos. His voice had that tight, controlled quality I remembered from his teenage years when he was trying not to lose his temper. Why would I do that? I asked, genuinely curious. Because it's embarrassing. For both of us. Do you know how many people from work have sent this to me? My wife's friends are sharing it on Facebook. I looked around my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd comforted him through heartbreaks and celebrated his successes, where I'd taught him to crack eggs and let him lick cake batter from the spoon. I'm sorry you're embarrassed, honey, but I'm not taking it down. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. This isn't like you, Mom. You don't do things like this. Maybe that's been the problem, I said quietly. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like I'd just climbed Mount Everest and jumped off a cliff at the same time. My phone continued buzzing with notifications I didn't understand, and I had the strange sensation of being famous without knowing what that meant. Nancy arrived within the hour, armed with her laptop and a determination to help me navigate this new world. Dolly, you're trending on Twitter, she announced, settling at my kitchen table like a general planning a campaign. What does that mean? It means you're more popular than the president right now. She showed me hashtags I'd never heard. Of Dart Lunch Lady Mom, Should Dolly Wisdom, Jack Casserole and Clutter. People were sharing photos of their own mothers, their own simple meals, their own collections of things others might call clutter, but they called memories. Look at this one, Nancy said, pointing to a tweet from someone named A Single Mom Strong. My son is embarrassed I work 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Thank you, Dolly. Kitchen for reminding me I should be proud, not apologetic. Lunch Lady Mom. I spent the afternoon reading comments and messages, each one like a small miracle. Women my age sharing stories of children who'd outgrown them. Younger people apologizing to mothers they'd taken for granted. Complete strangers offering to send me ceramic roosters from around the world. But it was the personal messages that broke my heart open in the best possible way. Mrs. Cartwright, you probably don't remember me, but you were my lunch lady at Jefferson Elementary from 2003 to 2007. You always made sure I had chocolate milk even when I forgot my lunch money. You saved my birthday when my mom was too sick to pack me anything special. Thank you for loving us kids like we were your own. The message was signed, Tyler Morrison, class of 2011. I remembered Tyler, a quiet boy with thick glasses who always sat alone. I'd started packing an extra sandwich every day just in case he was still hungry. That evening, the local news van pulled up outside my house. I watched from my living room window as a perfectly made-up reporter practiced her lines, while a cameraman adjusted his equipment. "Nancy, what do I do?" I called. She peeked through the blinds with the enthusiasm of someone who'd spent 40 years directing teenagers in dramatic productions. "You talk to them, of course. This is your moment, Dolly." I don't know how to have a moment. Honey, you've been having moments your whole life. Every time you made a lunch special for a homesick kid, every time you stretched $1 to make Christmas magical, every time you chose love over convenience. Those were all moments. This is just the first time anyone's been paying attention. The interview lasted 20 minutes, mostly filmed in my kitchen with me making another casserole. This time, the famous tuna one that had started everything. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica, who reminded me of the student teachers I used to help train, asked thoughtful questions about parenting, about sacrifice, about finding joy in simple things. What would you say to other parents whose adult children seem to have outgrown them? She asked. I thought about it while I mixed the noodles and tuna, the familiar motions calming my nerves. I'd say that love isn't something you outgrow, even when you think you have. It's always there, waiting for you to remember how it tasted, how it felt to be safe and cared for. Sometimes children need to go far away before they can see how far love traveled to reach them. The segment aired that night during the dinner hour. I watched myself on television, this ordinary woman in an ordinary kitchen, and marveled at how strange it felt to see my life reflected back at me through other people's eyes. My phone rang immediately after the broadcast ended. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was different this time, less controlled, more uncertain. "I saw the news story." "Oh, you looked happy. In the kitchen, I mean. The way you used to look when I was little and you'd let me help with dinner." I closed my eyes, remembering 5-year-old Ethan standing on a step stool beside me, more flour on his face than in the bowl. "I was happy then?" I said. "I'm happy now, too. But everyone's talking about us, about our family business." "Honey, the only business I talked about was love. If that embarrasses you, then we have bigger problems than anything the internet can solve." This time when he hung up, it felt less like a door slamming and more like someone who needed time to think. Over the next few days, my little YouTube channel exploded. Subscribers climbed past 50,000, then 100,000. Media requests poured in from magazines, talk shows, podcast hosts. Nancy appointed herself my unofficial manager, screening calls and helping me figure out which opportunities might be worthwhile. "Good Morning America wants you next week," she announced on Friday morning, waving a printout of an email like it was a winning lottery ticket. "I can't go on television," I protested. "I don't know how to be on television." "You were on television 3 days ago, and you were wonderful." "That was different. That was in my kitchen. So ask them to come here." And that's how I found myself explaining to a national morning show producer why I wouldn't come to New York. But they were welcome to bring their cameras to Boise. To my surprise, they agreed. The production crew arrived on Monday morning with enough equipment to film a small movie. They set up lights in my kitchen, strung cables through my hallway, and transformed my humble home into something that looked like a professional cooking show. Robin Roberts interviewed me while I made Harold's favorite chocolate chip cookies, the recipe I'd memorized so thoroughly I could bake them in my sleep. She asked about Ethan, about forgiveness, about what I hoped would come from all the attention. I hope parents remember that raising children isn't about creating perfect people, I said, measuring vanilla extract with the precision of someone who'd been baking for 5 decades. It's about loving them enough to let them become whoever they're meant to be, even when that person is different from what you imagined. And what about your son? What do you hope he takes from all this? I paused, my hand stilling over the cookie dough. I hope he remembers that being loved completely is a gift, not a burden, and that the people who knew you before you became successful are the ones who love you after success fades. The interview aired the next morning to an audience of millions. By noon, my YouTube channel had gained another 100,000 subscribers, and the comment section had become a place where people shared their own stories of family, forgiveness, and the complicated dance between parents and their grown children. But the message that mattered most came as a text from Ethan. "I'm coming home this weekend. We need to talk." The professional documentary camera arrived before Ethan did, carried by a young woman named Lisa Kim, who looked like she weighed less than my largest casserole dish. She had earnest dark eyes behind trendy glasses and the kind of focused energy that reminded me of the journalism students who used to interview me about cafeteria nutrition programs. "Mrs. Cartwright, I'm a graduate student at UCLA, and I've been following your story since the video went viral," she explained, carefully setting up her equipment in my living room. "I'd like to document what happens next if you're comfortable with that. I think there's something important here about generational divides, about how we value different kinds of success." Nancy, who had taken to vetting all my media requests with the intensity of a Secret Service agent, approved of Lisa immediately. "She gets it," Nancy whispered to me, while Lisa adjusted her camera settings. "She understands this isn't just about internet fame." I wasn't sure what this was anymore. In the 2 weeks since my video went viral, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. My YouTube channel now had over 300,000 subscribers who seemed genuinely interested in my cooking videos, my garden updates, and my rambling, stories about life in small-town Idaho. Brands wanted to send me free products. Publishers were asking about cookbook deals. The mayor of Boise had declared it Dolly Cartwright Day and given me a key to the city, which Nancy insisted I display on my mantelpiece between Harold's bowling trophy and Ethan's high school science fair ribbon. But none of the attention had brought Ethan home. He'd postponed his visit twice, citing work emergencies that sounded increasingly hollow. Our phone conversations had become awkward negotiations around scheduling, as if we were business associates rather than mother and son. "I think he's scared," I told Lisa as she filmed me preparing my weekly meal prep for the food pantry volunteers. "Fame changes how people see you, and he's not sure who I am anymore." "Who are you?" Lisa asked from behind her camera. "Has this changed how you see yourself?" I considered the question while layering lasagna in disposable aluminum pans. Outside my kitchen window, Reggie was working in his garden, occasionally glancing over with the shy smile he'd been giving me for months. Ever since the viral video, he'd been even more attentive, bringing me vegetables and compliments with equal generosity. "I'm still the same person," I said finally. "I still get up at 6, still check on my tomatoes first thing, still make too much food because I'm used to cooking for 2. But I feel louder, I guess. Like I've been whispering my whole life and suddenly learned I have a voice that carries. Lisa nodded, making a note in her small notebook. And how does that feel? Terrifying and wonderful at the same time. The interview was interrupted by my doorbell, followed by Nancy's voice calling, "Dolly, you've got company." Through my front window, I saw a sleek black car in my driveway and felt my heart skip. But it wasn't Ethan who walked through my door. It was Janine, his wife, carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing the kind of nervous smile people get when they're about to attempt something difficult. "Mrs. Cartwright," she said, extending the flowers like a peace offering. "I hope it's okay that I came without calling first." Janine and I had always maintained a polite distance. She was a nice enough girl. Woman now, I corrected myself, since she was 32 and ran her own public relations firm. But she lived in Ethan's new world of business dinners and networking events, and I'd never been sure where I fit in their carefully curated life. "Of course it's okay," I said, accepting the flowers. "You're always welcome here." Lisa quietly continued filming from the corner, and I'd almost forgotten she was there until Janine noticed the camera. "Oh, I can come back if you're busy with—" "No, stay," I insisted. "Lisa's documenting how this whole circus has affected my family. Your perspective might be valuable." Janine perched on the edge of my sofa, looking around the living room with what seemed like new eyes. Had she ever really looked at this house before? At the family photos covering every surface, the handmade quilts Harold's mother had sewn, the ceramic roosters that had become symbols of everything her husband found. "Embarrassing? I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. "For Ethan and for myself. We should have stood up for you. We should have been proud of where he came from instead of pretending it didn't matter." Sat down across from her, touched by her courage in coming here, in saying these things on camera. "Honey, you don't owe me an apology. You married Ethan, not his family history." "But that's just it," she said, her composure starting to crack. "I did marry his family history. I married a man who was shaped by a mother who loved him enough to work double shifts and save for years so he could go to college. I married someone who learned about dedication and sacrifice by watching you hold our family together after his father died. That history is part of why I fell in love with him." Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, and I found myself moving to sit beside her, on the sofa, offering the tissue box that had become a permanent fixture in my living room. Ever since the video went viral. But somewhere along the way, he convinced himself that being successful meant erasing all of that. And I let him. Because it was easier than fighting about it. I thought about all the times I'd called and Ethan was in meetings. All the holidays they'd spent with Janine's family instead of making the trip to Boise. All the casual mentions of me that had gradually disappeared from their social media posts. "Why now?" I asked gently. "Why come here now?" Janine wiped her eyes and looked directly at Lisa's camera. "Because watching your video made me realize that if we ever have children, I want them to know their grandmother. I want them to learn about love the way Ethan learned it, through casseroles and patience, and someone who shows up every single day." We talked for 2 hours. Janine told me about her own childhood with parents who measured success only in promotions and profit margins, who had been supportive but never warm, efficient but never nurturing. She talked about watching my video and recognizing something she'd never experienced, but had always craved. "Ethan doesn't know I came here," she admitted as she was getting ready to leave. "He's been paralyzed by all the attention, afraid that if he contacts you now, people will think he's only doing it because of the publicity. And what do you think he should do? I think he should remember that publicity fades, but family doesn't. I think he should come home and eat your tuna casserole and tell you he's sorry. After she left, I sat in my kitchen with Lisa, who had documented everything with the quiet professionalism of someone who understood she was witnessing something important. That was brave of her, Lisa observed, packing up her equipment. Yes, it was. Do you think Ethan will come? I looked out the window at Reggie's garden, where the late afternoon sun was turning everything golden. He was watering his tomatoes with the careful attention of someone who understood that growing things required patience and faith. I think people come home when they're ready, I said. And sometimes it takes a storm to remind them where home is. That evening, Nancy and I sat on my front porch, drinking iced tea and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. The day's heat was finally breaking, and the sprinklers were starting their evening symphony across the neighborhood. You know what I realized today? Nancy said, rocking gently in Harold's old chair. This isn't really about Ethan anymore. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. What do you mean? I mean you found your voice, Dolly. Whether he comes home or not, whether he apologizes or not, you've already won. You've reminded thousands of people that love doesn't have to be perfect, to be beautiful. My phone buzzed with another message from someone who'd seen my story. Another person sharing their own family struggles or expressing gratitude for my words. At some point, my pain had transformed into something larger than myself, something that connected me to people I'd never meet, but who understood the particular ache of loving someone who seemed determined to outgrow you. I think about Harold sometimes, I said, watching a young couple walk by with their toddler, all three of them eating ice cream cones. About how proud he'd be that something good came from all this hurt. He'd be proud of you for refusing to stay small, Nancy said, for taking up space in the world instead of apologizing for existing in it. Later that night, after Lisa had gone back to her hotel and Nancy had returned to her own house, I recorded another video for my YouTube channel. This time, I didn't plan what to say. I just sat in my kitchen with the late evening light slanting through the window and talked to the camera like it was an old friend. I want to tell you about courage, I began. Not the kind you see in movies, with explosions and dramatic music. The kind that looks like getting up every morning and choosing love even when love doesn't choose you back. The kind that looks like making a casserole for someone who might not appreciate it, or caring for a garden that might not bloom, or opening your heart to the possibility that tomorrow might be different from today. I talked about Janine's visit, about the strange gift of seeing myself through her eyes, about the realization that my story had become bigger than my own pain. If you're watching this because you recognize something in my story, if you've got your own Ethan, or your own hurt, or your own collection of things other people call clutter, but you call love, I want you to know something. You're not too old to matter. You're not too ordinary to be extraordinary. And you're definitely not too late to remind the world what real love looks like. The video gained 500,000 views overnight. But more importantly, it brought me a text message from Ethan. Mom, I'm driving up tomorrow. We really need to talk. The photograph fell out of Harold's old toolbox while I was looking for a screwdriver to fix my wobbly kitchen table. It must have been stuck in there for years, forgotten behind wrenches and measuring tape, waiting for the right moment to resurface. In the picture, 5-year-old Ethan is standing on a step stool beside me in this very kitchen, both of us covered in flour, grinning like we'd just discovered the secret to happiness. I'm helping him roll out cookie dough, his small hands under mine on the rolling pin. The look on his face is pure joy, not the careful, composed expression he wears now, but the uninhibited delight of a child who feels completely safe and loved. Was staring at this photograph when Ethan knocked on my front door. It had been 8 months since I'd seen him in person, and the first thing I noticed was how thin he looked, how the lines around his eyes had deepened. Success, it seemed, came with its own kind of wear. "Hi, Mom," he said, standing awkwardly on my doorstep like a stranger unsure of his welcome. "Hello, honey. Come in." We sat in my living room, the same room where he'd built countless blanket forts as a child, where we'd watched Disney movies during his sick days, where he'd practiced his high school graduation speech until he had every word memorized. Now it felt too small for the distance between us. "I saw Janine's car in your driveway yesterday," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "On your Ring doorbell footage." I'd forgotten about the security camera Nancy had insisted I install, after the media attention made her worry about my safety. She came to apologize, which she didn't need to do, but it was kind of her. She told me what she said, about wanting our future kids to know their grandmother. I waited, letting him set the pace of this conversation we'd been avoiding for months. "The thing is, Mom, I don't know if I want kids, and part of the reason is because I don't want to become the kind of father who—" He trailed off, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I remembered from his teenage years. "Who what?" "Who disappoints them the way I've disappointed you." The weight of his words settled between us. This wasn't the conversation I'd expected. I'd prepared for anger, for accusations, for demands that I take down the video and return to my quiet, invisible life. I hadn't prepared for this broken honesty. "Ethan, you haven't disappointed me because you're successful. You've disappointed me because you've pretended I don't exist." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Do you want to know the truth about why I really stopped calling?" I nodded, though something in his tone made me afraid of what was coming. "It started 3 years ago. I was at a client dinner trying to close this huge deal, and the potential investor started asking about my background. You know how these things go. They want to know your story, your motivation, what drives you." I remembered countless similar conversations from school board meetings and PTA fundraisers, the casual way people exchanged personal histories as a form of currency. So I told him about Dad dying when I was young, about how that motivated me to succeed, and he seemed interested, so he kept asking questions. Where did I grow up? What did my mother do? What was my childhood like? Ethan stood up and walked to my mantelpiece, where his school photos chronicled his transformation from gap-toothed child to serious teenager to confident young man. I panicked, Mom. I looked at this guy in his $1,000 suit, sitting in this restaurant where the appetizers cost more than most people spend on groceries, and I couldn't figure out how to explain that my mother was a lunch lady who clipped coupons and shopped at thrift stores and found joy in ceramic roosters. He picked up the framed photo of his high school graduation, the one where I'm beaming with pride in my best dress. The blue one I'd bought on sale at JCPenney, specifically for that day. "Not because I was ashamed of you," he continued, his voice breaking slightly, "but because I was ashamed of myself, because somewhere along the way, I'd started measuring my own worth by how far I could get from where I started, and the farther I got, the more I felt like I was betraying everything you taught me about what really matters." I felt my world tilt slightly. the way it does when you realize you've been seeing a situation completely backward. So instead of dealing with that shame, I just stopped calling as much, stopped bringing you up in conversation, stopped integrating my old life with my new one. It was easier than facing the fact that I'd become someone I wasn't sure I liked. He turned back to me, and I saw in his face the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort from the only parent he had left. When that video went viral, when I saw you talking about casseroles and clutter and everything I'd dismissed, I realized what I'd lost. Not just my relationship with you, but my relationship with the parts of myself that were actually worth something. I stood up and walked to where he was standing, taking the graduation photo from his hands and looking at it with new eyes. In the picture, I'm not thinking about my discount dress or my unfashionable shoes. I'm thinking about how proud I am, how grateful I am to have been able to give him this moment. Ethan, I said gently, do you remember this day? He nodded. Do you remember what you told me when we got home? He shook his head, so I continued. You said, Mom, I couldn't have done any of this without you. You're the strongest person I know, and I hope I can be half as good a person as you are. And I thought, that's it. That's the whole point of being a parent. To raise someone who understands that strength doesn't mean never needing help, and success doesn't mean forgetting where you came from. I handed him the photograph I'd found in Harold's toolbox, watching his face change as he took in our flower-covered, joyful younger selves. You were so excited to help me bake that day, I said. You kept saying you were going to be the best cookie maker in the whole world. And when they came out of the oven, and half of them were burned because we got distracted playing with the flour, you said it didn't matter because we made them together. Ethan traced our faces in the photo with one finger, and I could see him, remembering not just that day, but dozens of others like it. I've been thinking a lot about this since your video, he said quietly, about how I used to love helping you in the kitchen, how I used to be proud when kids at school would say my mom made the best lunches. When did I start thinking that wasn't enough? When the world told you it wasn't, I said. When you started measuring your worth by other people's standards instead of your own. We stood there in my living room, surrounded by the artifacts of a life lived simply but fully, and I felt something shift between us. Not back to the way things were. We'd both changed too much for that, but forward to something new. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. I don't know how to be successful without feeling like I'm betraying who I used to be. Honey, you don't have to choose. You can be both the little boy who loved making cookies and the man who builds companies. You can honor where you came from while embracing where you're going. Lisa arrived that afternoon to continue filming, and I asked if she wanted to capture this conversation. Ethan agreed, though I could see it cost him something to expose his vulnerability to a stranger's camera. What would you say to other people who feel caught between two versions of themselves? Lisa asked him. Ethan thought for a moment, still holding the childhood photograph. I'd say that growing up doesn't have to mean growing away from the people who made you who you are. Success isn't about erasing your past. It's about honoring it while building something new. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my son clearly. And I'd say that if you're lucky enough to have someone who loved you unconditionally when you had nothing to offer but yourself, you should probably call them more often. We spent the rest of the weekend cooking together, his hands once again under mine as we rolled out dough and shared stories. He told me about his company, about the stress of running a business, about his fears of parenthood, I told him about my viral fame, about the overwhelming response to my story, about my own fears of losing myself in other people's expectations. "The funny thing is," he said on Sunday evening as he packed to leave, "your video taught me something I had forgotten. That authenticity is actually the most valuable currency there is. People connected with you because you were completely yourself, not because you were trying to be someone else." "Does that mean you're not ashamed of your eccentric mother anymore?" I asked, only half joking. He hugged me then, the kind of fierce, holding-on hug he used to give me when he was small and afraid of the dark. "I was never ashamed of you, Mom. I was ashamed of myself for thinking I needed to be ashamed of you. There's a difference." As I watched his car disappear down Maple Street, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just for our relationship, but for the possibility that broken things could be mended, that distances could be bridged, that love could be bigger than pride. That night I made another video, this one about forgiveness and second chances and the courage it takes to admit when you've been wrong. I talked about the photograph, about the little boy in the kitchen, about the man who'd driven 6 hours to say he was sorry. The video went viral again, but this time the comments were different. Instead of anger at ungrateful children, there were stories of reconciliation, of families reaching out across years of silence, of people choosing connection over pride. And for the first time since this whole journey began, I felt like maybe I'd done more than just defend myself. Maybe I'd reminded people that love is always worth fighting for, even when the fight is with ourselves. The live stream equipment arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a young technician named Marcus, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else than setting up cameras in a 67-year-old woman's kitchen. Nancy supervised the installation with the intensity of a theater director, making sure the lighting would be flattering and the camera angles would showcase both my face and my cooking. "This is it, Dolly," she said, adjusting the ring light for the third time. "Your moment to address everyone directly, no editing, no intermediaries, just you and 500,000 people watching in real time." The idea for the live stream had come from Lisa, whose documentary about my viral journey was gaining its own momentum. She'd connected me with a media company that wanted to sponsor a special broadcast, Dinner with Dolly, a live conversation about family, food, and forgiveness. "People are invested in your story now," Lisa had explained. "They want to know what happens next. This gives you a chance to control that narrative instead of having it told for you." What she didn't say, but what we all understood, was that this would likely be my last moment in the spotlight. Viral fame is notoriously fleeting, and already I could see the attention starting to shift to newer stories, fresher outrage. This live stream would be my chance to say everything I wanted to say before the world moved on. Ethan had agreed to appear with me, though I could see the decision cost him something. His company's public relations team had advised against it, concerned about how his association with internet drama might affect his professional reputation. But Janine had convinced him, and more importantly, he'd convinced himself that some things mattered more than image management. "I need to do this," he'd told me during our planning call. "Not for your audience, but for us. I need people to see that I'm not the villain in this story. But I'm also not going to pretend I didn't make mistakes." The live stream was scheduled for Saturday evening, prime time for the YouTube audience that had embraced my story. In the days leading up to it, my subscriber count climbed past 800,000, and the comments on my announcement video ranged from excitement to skepticism to genuine concern for our family's privacy. "Are you ready for this?" Reggie asked on Friday evening as we sat on my front porch, sharing a pitcher of iced tea and watching the neighborhood settle into twilight. He'd become a daily presence in my life over the past month, our friendship deepening into something that felt like the beginning of romance, though neither of us was in any hurry to define it. "I don't think anyone can be ready for something like this," I admitted. "But I'm not afraid anymore. The worst thing that could happen was losing my son, and that already happened. Everything since then has been a gift." Reggie reached over and took my hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with mine. "You know what I admire most about you." "Dolly!" "You turned your pain into something beautiful. Not everyone can do that. That evening I couldn't sleep. I wandered through my house looking at the life I'd built, and somehow managed to share with the world. My ceramic roosters seemed to watch me with their painted eyes, these small companions that had become symbols of joy, found in simple things. The kitchen where I'd raised my son and learned to cook for one, and discovered I had something worth saying to strangers. I found myself in Harold's old study, a small room I'd barely touched since he died. His books were still arranged exactly as he'd left them, his reading glasses still folded on the desk, beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. I picked up a photo of the three of us from Ethan's college graduation, all of us grinning with the kind of happiness that comes from shared accomplishment. "I wish you were here for this, Harold," I said to the quiet room. "You always knew what to say when I was scared, but maybe I didn't need Harold's words anymore. Maybe I'd finally found my own." Saturday morning brought a flurry of preparation. Lisa arrived early to do final equipment checks and brief me on the technical aspects of live streaming. Nancy came with reinforcements in the form of my friend, Margaret from church, who'd volunteered to help with whatever needed helping. "It's like opening night," Nancy announced, arranging flowers in the background of my kitchen set. "Except instead of a theater full of people, it's half the internet. That's not helping my nerves," I told her. "Honey, you've been performing for an audience your whole life. Every time you made a school lunch special for a homesick kid, every time you comforted a neighbor, every time you chose kindness over convenience, that was all performance. This is just a bigger stage." Ethan arrived at 3:00, looking professionally dressed but personally nervous. He'd lost more weight since our reunion, and I wondered if the stress of our public reconciliation was taking its toll on him. "How are you feeling?" I asked, offering him a cup of coffee from the pot I'd been nervously refilling all day. "Like I'm about to admit to the entire internet that I've been an ungrateful son," he said with a rueful smile. "You're about to admit that you're human," I corrected. "That you made mistakes and you're trying to do better. That's not something to be ashamed of." We spent the afternoon going over our planned conversation, though Lisa reminded us that the beauty of live streaming was its unpredictability. We would cook together, the famous tuna casserole that had started everything, and talk about what we'd learned, where we were going, and what we hoped viewers would take from our story. "Remember," Lisa said as we did final mic checks, "this isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. That's what people connected with in the first place." At 6:00 we went live. "Hello, everyone," I said, looking directly into the camera with a smile that felt only slightly forced. "I'm Dolly Cartwright, and this is my son, Ethan. Thank you for joining us in my kitchen for what I hope will be an honest conversation about family, forgiveness, and the courage it takes to admit when you've been wrong." The view count climbed rapidly. 50,000, 100,000, 250,000. Comments poured in faster than I could read them, a stream of hearts and encouragement and questions about everything from the recipe we were making to the deeper questions about parent-child relationships. "Before we start cooking," I continued, "I want to address something. A lot of you have been angry at Ethan on my behalf, and I appreciate that loyalty. But anger isn't why we're here tonight. We're here because we believe love is stronger than pride and families are worth fighting for. Ethan stepped into the frame, and I could see him take a deep breath before speaking. I want to start by saying something I should have said months ago. He began, his voice steadier than I'd expected. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the things I said about you. I'm sorry for the distance I created between us, and I'm sorry it took a viral video for me to remember what you mean to me. The comments exploded with responses, some supportive, some skeptical, many simply moved by the rawness of the moment. We began cooking together, falling into the familiar rhythm we'd rediscovered during his visit. As we layered noodles and tuna, and cream of mushroom soup, we talked about the mistakes we'd both made, the lessons we'd learned, and the work that rebuilding trust requires. One thing I want people to understand, Ethan said as we slid the casserole into the oven, is that my mother never made me feel ashamed of our circumstances. That shame was something I created myself, because I confused moving up in the world with moving away from the people who helped me get there. I watched the viewer count climb past 400,000, then 500,000. These weren't just numbers anymore. They were people, families, stories of their own struggles and reconciliations. I've learned something these past few months, I said, addressing the camera while Ethan cleaned dishes behind me. I've learned that speaking your truth, even when it's painful, can create space for other people to speak theirs. I've heard from thousands of parents who felt invisible, thousands of children who realized they'd taken love for granted. That's been the real gift of this experience. A viewer asked about advice for estranged families, and Ethan answered with honesty that made me proud. Start small, he said. Don't try to fix everything in one conversation. Just reach out. Say you miss them. Say you're sorry. Say you want to try again. The rest you can figure out together. As the stream continued, I felt the last of my nervousness fade away. This was just conversation, just sharing a meal, and honest words with people who'd chosen to spend their Saturday evening with us. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. Before we sign off, I said as the casserole timer chimed, I want to say something to anyone watching who feels like they're not enough, like their life is too small or ordinary to matter. You matter. Your love matters. Your story matters. And you're never too old to start telling it. The viewer count had reached nearly 600,000 by the time we ended the stream. The comments section was flooded with gratitude, with people sharing their own plans to reach out to estranged family members, with promises to call their mothers and appreciate their fathers, and remember that love doesn't have to be perfect, to be powerful. But the moment that mattered most came after the cameras stopped rolling, when Ethan helped me pack up the leftover casserole and said, Mom, would it be okay if I called you tomorrow? Not for the internet, not for publicity. Just because I miss talking to you. I'd like that very much, I said, and meant it more than anything I'd ever said to a camera. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, 3 days after our live stream had broken YouTube records and made national news. I found it slipped under my front door, written in Ethan's careful handwriting on real paper. Not email, not text, but the kind of old-fashioned correspondence I'd taught him to write when he was 8 years old, and we practiced thank you notes together at this same kitchen table. The envelope simply said, Mom, in blue ink, and I held it for a long time before opening it, remembering all the other letters he'd written me over the years. Crayon-scrawled Mother's Day cards, apologetic notes after childhood misbehavior, the formal letter he'd sent from college explaining, Why he was changing his major from pre-med to business. Inside were 3 pages of his thoughts, written with the kind of care that comes from someone who's finally figured out what they need to say. Dear Mom, I've been trying to write this letter for 6 months, ever since I first saw your video and realized how badly I'd failed you. I've started it dozens of times, but every draft felt inadequate for what I needed to express. Maybe that's because there aren't really words for the kind of regret I'm carrying. Or maybe it's because I finally understand that apologies are actions, not just words. I want to tell you about the moment I knew I'd lost my way. It was 2 years ago, at a company retreat, where everyone was sharing stories about their childhood heroes. Person after person talked about famous athletes, successful entrepreneurs, celebrities who'd inspired them to achieve greatness. When my turn came, I talked about Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, about innovation and disruption, and changing the world through technology. But driving home that night, I realized I'd lied. My actual childhood hero was you. You were the person who showed me what real strength looked like. Not the kind that comes from power or money, but the kind that shows up every single day, that finds joy in small moments, that chooses love, even when love is difficult. I remembered watching you get ready for work every morning, how you'd pack lunches for the kids who forgot theirs, how you'd save the best cookies for the ones who seemed the hungriest. I remembered the way you'd sit with me when I had nightmares after Dad died, how you'd make up stories about brave roosters who protected their families. I remembered how you worked extra shifts to pay for my SAT prep courses, how you drove me to every college interview, how you cried tears of pride at my graduation. That was my real hero. Not some billionaire who revolutionized technology, but my mother, who revolutionized my understanding of what it means to be a good person. So why didn't I tell that story? Why did I choose corporate success stories over the woman who actually shaped my character? Because somewhere along the way, I started believing that admitting you came from humble beginnings diminished your achievements. I thought that acknowledging my roots would make me seem less sophisticated, less worthy of the success I'd worked so hard to build. I was wrong about everything. Success without context is just numbers on a balance sheet. Achievement without acknowledging the people who made it possible is just ego. I spent so much energy trying to become someone impressive that I forgot to be someone good. When your video went viral, my first reaction was panic. Not because you'd embarrassed me, but because you'd exposed me. You'd shown the world that I was exactly the kind of person who would abandon the people who loved me in pursuit of some hollow version of success. You'd revealed that all my talk about values and integrity was just marketing copy. That when it really mattered, I chose image over substance. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of judgment, I found grace. Instead of condemnation, I found thousands of people sharing their own stories of family strain, of children who drifted from their parents, of love that survived even the deepest disappointments. Your video didn't just tell our story. It gave permission for other families to tell theirs. I've spent the last month reading every comment, every message, every story that your courage inspired people to share. And I've learned something that I should have known all along. Authenticity is the most valuable thing you can offer the world. Not the polished version of yourself that you think people want to see, but the messy, complicated, beautifully human truth of who you really are. You've always known that. You've always been exactly who you are, without apology or pretense. You've found joy in ceramic roosters and pride in simple meals, and satisfaction in quiet acts of service. You've never needed the world's approval to know your own worth. I want to be like that. I want to be the kind of person who doesn't need external validation to feel valuable, who can find meaning in connection rather than achievement, who remembers that the point of climbing mountains isn't to look down on the people below, but to help others make the climb. I know this letter can't undo the hurt I've caused or the time we've lost. I know trust has to be rebuilt through actions, not words. But I wanted you to know that this experience has changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I've started therapy to understand how I lost sight of what really matters. I've had difficult conversations with Janine about the kind of family we want to build together. I've even started cooking again. Nothing fancy, just simple meals that remind me of the kitchen where I learned that feeding people is an act of love. If you'll let me, I want to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of convenience. I want to call you not because I should, but because I want to hear your voice. I want to visit not out of obligation, but because your house is the place where I learned that home isn't about perfection. It's about being loved completely, ceramic roosters and all. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to earn back your trust, to prove that the lessons you taught me about kindness and humility and the importance of showing up for the people you love weren't wasted on me. They just got buried under years of misguided priorities. Thank you for loving me enough to call me out. Thank you for being brave enough to tell our story. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to remember who you really are. And thank you for the casseroles, all of them, even the ones I was too ungrateful to appreciate at the time. Your son, Ethan P.S. I found something in my old room at home that I think belongs to you. I'll bring it when I come for dinner next Sunday, if that invitation is still open. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness this time, but tears of relief, of gratitude, of the particular joy that comes from watching someone you love remember who they're meant to be. Nancy found me there an hour later, still holding the letter. Good news or bad news? She asked, settling into the chair across from me. The best news, I said, handing her the letter. My son is coming home. She read it in silence, her own eyes filling as she reached the end. Dolly, this is beautiful. This is what healing looks like. He wants to have dinner Sunday. Just us, no cameras, no internet. Just family. What are you going to make? I looked around my kitchen at the scene of so many meals shared and memories made, and smiled. I think I'll let him cook this time. He says he's been practicing. That afternoon, Lisa stopped by to check on me. The documentary she'd been filming had evolved into something larger than either of us had anticipated, and she was planning to premiere it at several film festivals before releasing it online. How do you feel about all this ending? She asked, settling her camera equipment in my living room for what she said would be our final interview. It's not ending, I said. It's just beginning. The internet fame might fade, but what I've learned about myself, what Ethan and I have learned about each other, that's permanent. What do you want people to remember about your story? I thought about that as I arranged flowers in Harold's favorite vase, the simple ritual that had started this whole journey. I want them to remember that love doesn't require perfection, that families can survive disappointment and grow stronger from forgiveness, that you're never too old to speak your truth or too proud to admit when you've been wrong. And what's next for you? Sunday dinner, I said simply. And probably a lot more after that. Saturday evening, I prepared for Ethan's visit with the kind of care I hadn't taken in months. I cleaned house not because it needed it, but because I wanted everything to be perfect for this new beginning. I set the table with Harold's good china, arranged fresh flowers from Reggie's garden, and made sure my ceramic roosters were properly dusted. Reggie stopped by while I was putting the finishing touches on the dining room. "Big day tomorrow," he said, admiring my preparations. "The biggest in a long time." "You know what I think?" he said, taking my hands in his weathered ones. "I think Harold would be proud of how you handled all this. You took a painful situation and turned it into something that helped thousands of families. That's not just resilience, that's grace." Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect September day that makes you grateful to be alive. I woke early and spent time in my garden, picking tomatoes and green beans for the meal Ethan would prepare. Everything felt symbolic, charged with meaning. The vegetables Harold had planted, the kitchen where I'd learned to cook, the table where we'd shared so many family meals. Ethan arrived at noon carrying a grocery bag and something wrapped in tissue paper. He looked different somehow. Not the polished businessman or the nervous son trying to manage a crisis, but just Ethan, my child, coming home. "Hi, Mom," he said, and this time when he hugged me, it felt like he meant it completely. "What's in the bag?" I asked, trying to peer inside. "Ingredients for Dad's favorite meal," he said. "I've been practicing. Janine says I'm almost as good as you now, but she might be biased." We spent the afternoon cooking together, talking and laughing in a way that felt both familiar and entirely new. He told me about his plans to restructure his company around values that actually mattered to him, about his and Janine's decision to start trying for children, about the therapy that was helping him understand the difference between success and significance. "I have something for you," he said when we sat down to eat. He handed me the tissue-wrapped package, watching nervously as I opened it. Inside was a small ceramic rooster, clearly handmade, painted in bright blues and yellows with slightly uneven strokes that spoke of careful amateur work. "I made it in a pottery class," he said almost shyly. "I know it's not as nice as the ones you collect, but I wanted you to have something that came from me, something that shows I finally understand what these really represent." I held the little rooster carefully, marveling at the love that had gone into its creation, at the grown man who'd taken a pottery class because he wanted to make something meaningful for his mother. "It's perfect," I said, and I meant it. "What's his name?" Ethan smiled, the same smile he'd worn in that flower-covered photograph from his childhood. "I was hoping you'd call him Hope." 6 months after the live stream that changed everything, I sit in my kitchen looking at the newest addition to my refrigerator gallery, a professional family photo taken at Ethan and Janine's house in San Francisco. In it, the 4 of us, Ethan, Janine, Reggie, and I, are arranged around their kitchen island, all of us laughing at something Reggie had said just before the photographer snapped the picture. It's not a formal portrait. Janine is mid-gesture, her hand reaching for ingredients we were using to make Sunday dinner together. Ethan has flour on his apron, and that same uninhibited grin he wore as a child. Reggie looks slightly bewildered by the photographer's equipment, but happy to be included. And I'm looking at my son instead of the camera, my face filled with the kind of maternal pride that no amount of fame could ever match. The photo represents everything we've built together in these months of careful reconstruction, not a return to what we had before. That innocence was lost forever, but something deeper, more intentional, more honest. Reggie and I were married 3 months ago in a small ceremony in my backyard, officiated by Pastor Williams from my church, and witnessed by Nancy, Ethan, Janine, and about 50 of our closest friends. At 73 and 67, we figured we were too old for long engagements and too wise to waste time on elaborate weddings. Nancy handled the flowers, Ethan and Janine flew in to help with preparations, and I wore the same blue dress I'd bought for Ethan's high school graduation because it still fit, and because something about wearing it again felt like completing a circle. "You know what I love most about this?" Reggie had said as we danced to Frank Sinatra in my living room while our guests ate cake on the porch. "Getting to love you exactly as you are, ceramic roosters and all." My YouTube channel has settled into a comfortable rhythm of about 200,000 subscribers who tune in weekly for cooking videos, garden updates, and life wisdom from a woman who accidentally became an internet grandmother to thousands of people she'll never meet. The brand deals and media requests have mostly faded, which suits me fine. Fame was never the point. Connection was. I still get messages from families who've reconciled after watching our story. From adult children who called their parents. From parents who learned to let go of their expectations and love their children as they are. Last week, a woman named Sarah sent me a photo of her first conversation with her estranged daughter in 5 years, sparked by watching our live stream together from opposite coasts. "Your story gave us permission to try again," Sarah wrote. "Thank you for showing us that love is stronger than pride." Lisa's documentary, Finding Dolly, a story of family, fame, and forgiveness, premiered at Sundance and won the Audience Award for Best Documentary Short. It's been picked up by Netflix, and Lisa tells me it's being used in family therapy sessions across the country. She visits every few months, documenting how our story continues to evolve, though now she feels more like family than filmmaker. Ethan calls every Sunday, not because he should, but because he wants to. Our conversations have deepened beyond surface pleasantries into real discussions about life, parenting, the challenge of staying true to your values in a world that often rewards compromise. He has restructured his company around a mission that actually means something to him, focusing on technology that helps small businesses tell their stories authentically. I finally figured out what success actually looks like. He told me during our last conversation. It's not about how high you climb. It's about how many people you bring with you. Janine is 4 months pregnant with their first child, a daughter. They've decided to name Hope after the ceramic rooster Ethan made for me. She's been reading parenting books and calling me for advice about everything from nursery colors to how to raise children who understand that love isn't a transaction. "I want to be the kind of mother who shows up every day," she said when she told me about the pregnancy. "The kind who makes ordinary moments feel special, like you did for Ethan." They're moving to Portland next month, close enough for regular visits but far enough to maintain their independence. Ethan's company will operate remotely, and Janine is starting a nonprofit focused on helping families navigate technology together. They bought a house with a big kitchen and a garden, planning to create the kind of home where their children will want to bring their own families someday. "We want Hope to know her grandmother," Ethan said when they showed me photos of the house. "We want her to learn about love the way I learned about it, through patience and presence and really good food." Nancy is directing the community theater's production of Steel Magnolias and has convinced me to audition for the role of Weezer, the cranky neighbor who turns out to have a heart of gold. At 67, I'm apparently having my theatrical debut, though Nancy insists I've been performing my whole life. "You just never realized you were doing it," she said during our first rehearsal. "Every time you made a sad child smile in that cafeteria, every time you turned a house into a home, every time you chose kindness over convenience, that was all performance. Now you're just doing it on purpose." The church food pantry where I volunteer has expanded to serve 3 times as many families, funded partly by donations from people who heard my story. We've added a community garden where families can grow their own vegetables, and a teaching kitchen where parents can learn to prepare nutritious meals on tight budgets. It's become more than charity. It's become community. You know what's beautiful about what you've built here? Reggie said last week as we worked side by side, preparing meal kits for distribution. It's not about the food, though the food matters. It's about dignity, about letting people know they're worth caring for. My ceramic rooster collection has grown to 73 pieces, including gifts from viewers around the world who wanted to share their own symbols of simple joy. Each one still has a story, but now the stories include connections to people I've never met, but somehow know intimately through shared experiences of love, loss, and the courage to keep believing in beauty. Hope, Ethan's handmade rooster, sits in the place of honor on my kitchen windowsill, where the morning light catches his slightly uneven glaze and makes him glow. Every time I see him, I'm reminded that the most precious gifts are the ones made with love rather than bought with money. Yesterday, I received a letter from a woman named Patricia in Ohio, whose son returned from military deployment to find her. Viral video, and realized how much he'd missed her during his years of service. Today, I got a message from a teenager in Texas who showed my videos to her grandmother and convinced her to start sharing her own stories online. My abuela has the best recipes and the best advice, the teenager wrote. And after watching you, I realized that wisdom shouldn't die with the people who have it. Thank you for showing me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. This morning, as I water my garden and check on the tomatoes that are finally ripening in the late September sun, I think about the journey that brought me here. A year ago, I was a lonely widow whose greatest audience was 47 YouTube subscribers and a collection of ceramic roosters. I measured my days in small routines and quiet satisfactions, believing my story was too ordinary to matter to anyone beyond my immediate circle. I was wrong about almost everything. My story mattered not because it was extraordinary, but because it was ordinary, because millions of people recognized themselves in my struggle to feel valued, in my disappointment with relationships that had grown distant, in my determination to find joy, despite circumstances that sometimes felt overwhelming. The viral video that started this whole journey was born from pain, but what grew from it was so much more valuable. Connection, reconciliation, purpose, and the deep satisfaction that comes from living authentically. I learned that speaking your truth, even when your voice shakes, can create space for other people to speak theirs. I learned that love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. I learned that you're never too old to start over, never too ordinary to inspire others, never too late to insist on being valued for exactly who you are. Ethan and Janine are driving up next weekend to help me plant bulbs for next spring's garden. We'll work side by side in the soil Harold prepared years ago, planning for blooms we'll see together when the baby is crawling and the world has moved on to different stories. But our family remains rooted in this place, this love, this commitment to showing up for each other. Reggie is making his famous apple pie for the occasion, and I'm planning to film the entire weekend for my YouTube channel, not because I need the attention anymore, but because I've learned that sharing joy multiplies it, that documenting love makes it stronger, that the simple act of bearing witness to good things helps them grow. What would you tell your younger self? A viewer asked in a recent comment. What would you say to the woman who felt invisible and unimportant? I thought about that question as I arranged this week's flowers. Dahlias from Reggie's garden, the last blooms before the first frost comes to end this growing season and begin the quiet rest that makes new growth possible. I would tell her that feeling invisible doesn't mean you actually are invisible. I would tell her that the love you pour into ordinary moments, into simple meals, into quiet acts of service, creates ripples you may never see, but that touch lives in ways you can't imagine. I would tell her that her voice matters, her story matters, her presence in the world makes a difference even when, especially when, that difference feels too small to measure. I would tell her that ceramic roosters and tuna casseroles and the patient love of lunch ladies are not embarrassments to be hidden, but treasures to be celebrated. I would tell her that the people who love you, for who you are instead of who you might become, are the people worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth believing in, even when they forget to believe in themselves. Most of all, I would tell her that the ordinary life she's building, one careful day at a time, is already extraordinary. That the story she's writing with small choices and daily kindnesses is already worth telling. That she doesn't need the world's permission to matter. She already matters more than she knows as the sun sets over Boise, painting my kitchen golden, with the same light that witnessed my transformation from invisible to unforgettable. I look at the new family photo on my refrigerator and smile. Tomorrow Ethan will call with stories about his work. Janine will send ultrasound photos of their growing daughter. And I'll tend my garden and cook my meals and love my roosters, secure in the knowledge that simple joys are the most profound ones, that authentic love is the most valuable currency, and that you're never too old to discover that your ordinary life has been extraordinary all along. The tuna casserole recipe that started this whole journey has been requested by over 100 people. But the real recipe I shared was simpler and more complex. How to love completely, how to forgive generously, how to show up consistently, and how to believe that your story, whatever it is, however small it seems, deserves to be told with pride. In the end, that's what I learned from becoming accidentally famous for being exactly who I've always been. That the greatest revolution is simply refusing to apologize for loving deeply, living authentically, and finding joy in the beautiful, ordinary moments that make up a life well lived. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the people you love most will remember that they learned how to love by watching you do it first. One casserole, one conversation, one ceramic rooster at a time. It's been just over a year since the video that changed everything, and today, I am standing in my garden wearing rubber gloves up to my elbows, coaxing stubborn carrots out of the soil, while Reggie hums a gospel tune off-key beside me. My knees crack when I crouch now, and Reggie jokes that the carrots are practicing civil disobedience. I suppose we both are. We're too old to be chasing carrots. Too sentimental to stop trying. The sky above Boise is a blanket of soft autumn blue, the kind that reminds you to slow down and look up. It's the kind of day where the sun lingers just long enough to soften your shoulders, where birds call each other like gossiping neighbors, and every breeze feels like it's brushing secrets across your cheeks. There's a little girl sleeping in a bassinet beside the porch, wrapped in a handmade quilt stitched with tiny roosters and daisies. Her name is Hope Louise Cartwright, and she's the first person in the world who ever made me feel young again at 70. Her breath rises and falls like waves on a pond. Every now and then she makes these little squeaking sounds, like a drawer, opening too gently. Ethan and Janine are inside, fixing lunch. Tuna casserole, of course. By popular demand, but also by tradition. Ethan says he's now an expert in bechamel, though he still calls it that creamy stuff, which makes Janine roll her eyes with affectionate exasperation. She's still fierce, still opinionated, but lately she's taken to calling me Mama. Dee with a twinkle in her voice that melts any remaining frost. It's strange, this quiet joy. I used to think joy came like thunder, loud, crashing, unforgettable. But this past year has taught me that the deepest joys are soft. They sneak up on you in the middle of ordinary mornings, disguised as the smell of warm bread or the soft hum of a baby sleeping beside your garden bench. The world has, of course, moved on. The story of Lunch Lady Mom Goes Viral has been replaced by 1,000 newer stories, some touching, others absurd. Lisa's documentary had its time in the spotlight, won a few awards, and now lives on streaming platforms where curious people occasionally discover it and send heartfelt messages. I still get fan mail, believe it or not, though these days, most of it comes in the form of handwritten letters from people who say, I remind them of their mother, their grandmother, their neighbor, their teacher. I keep a box of them in my linen closet, right next to Harold's old fishing gear. I've read every single one, often twice. Some are short, just a, thank you for reminding me to call my dad. Or, your story helped me forgive my sister. Others are pages long, confessions of lost time, strained family ties, and the slow work of healing. There's something sacred in those envelopes, in the way strangers trust me with their private heartbreaks and hard-won reconciliations. It makes me feel useful, needed, which is funny, considering how invisible I used to feel before all this happened. I've stopped chasing fame. I've turned down every talk show offer since spring. I still post cooking videos, but only when I feel like it. No sponsorships, no scripts. Just Dolly in her kitchen, telling stories while she stirs stew, or bakes biscuits or tries to explain the physics of gelatin. Some weeks, I forget to post it all, and the world doesn't end. That's the lesson I didn't expect to learn from going viral. You don't need an audience to matter. You just need one person who really sees you. For me, that's Reggie. He asked me to marry him 6 months ago. Not with a ring, but with a letter. A handwritten note left under my coffee mug that read, I can't imagine a life without our mornings. Would you be mine for the rest of them? I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Then I cried. Then I said yes. We didn't have a wedding, just a promise, made on the porch, with our hands pressed together and hope babbling in the background. Nancy cried more than either of us, declaring herself maid of honor emeritus, and baked a 6-layer hummingbird cake that fell over before we could cut it. That's what love looks like in your 70s. Lopsided cake, second chances, and laughter so deep it echoes through your ribcage. Ethan's transformation has been slow, but steady. He still runs his company, though now he takes weekends off. He built a paternity leave policy for his staff before Hope was born and insisted on taking every day of it. He was learning how to parent without perfection, something I keep reminding. Him isn't a goal, but a journey. He still gets flustered when Hope cries, still burns toast half the time, but he's present. He's trying. That's what matters. He calls me nearly every day now. Not because of guilt, but because he wants to. Sometimes we talk about casseroles, sometimes about climate change, sometimes nothing at all. Just the sound of someone you love breathing on the other end of the line can be enough. Janine's nonprofit is growing fast. She's helping families navigate technology in ways that protect kids and honor elders. Her most popular initiative? A digital archive program where grandparents record their stories for future generations. She credits me with the idea. I told her I was just trying not to forget the sound of Harold's laugh. This fall, she asked if I'd record an oral history for Hope. Not a fancy, edited thing. Just me, talking into a recorder, sharing memories. I've filled 3 tapes already. Hope will know everything from how Harold proposed, under a broken street lamp after the county fair, to the time I accidentally dyed Ethan's Easter suit green in the wash. She'll know about the first casserole I ever made, the worst one I ever made, spoiler, curried lasagna, and why we keep a ceramic rooster in every room. Speaking of roosters, my collection has reached 100. That includes Hope, the handmaid, one Ethan gave me that started this new chapter of our lives. He sits on the kitchen windowsill, his uneven glaze shining like a badge of survival. I've started giving roosters away now. One to a young mom who came to the pantry in tears and left with a full bag of groceries and a ceramic bird to watch over her kitchen. One to a widower from my church who said his house had grown too quiet. One to Lisa when she screened the documentary at our community center. Each rooster now feels like a blessing passed forward. And that's what this year has been. A blessing passed forward. Not a miracle. Not a fairy tale. Just the quiet, persistent work of forgiveness and rebuilding. Not every story needs a grand finale. Some just need room to keep unfolding. Sometimes I sit on my porch with Reggie as the sun sets behind the hills, and we count the things that last. Not the things people chase. Money, prestige, appearances. But the things that endure. The smell of your husband's cologne still lingering on his old flannel shirt. The way your son says, "Mom," when he needs advice. The feel of your granddaughter's tiny fingers wrapping around yours like you're the whole world. The way a casserole can still say what words can't. That's what this story was really about, wasn't it? Not about shame, or internet fame, or even reconciliation. It was about remembering. Remembering that love, once planted, doesn't die. It waits. Sometimes for years. Sometimes buried under pride and distance and silence. But it waits. And if you're lucky, if you're patient, and if you're brave enough to say what needs saying, it blooms. This morning, Hope reached for my rooster mug while I was drinking tea, her chubby fingers wrapped around the handle like it was the most precious thing in the world. I let her hold it, just for a second, and in that moment, I saw the whole future stretched out in front of us. Messy, beautiful, full of casseroles, and clutter and laughter and everything in between. And I thought, this is enough. This life, this love, this ordinary, extraordinary, unapologetically cluttered life. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.